What a weekend, man. I'm thinking to myself, you get Ramaswamy after Iowa. That was somewhat of a no-brainer. The Tim Scott thing I thought was a total coup, right? And that was like a huge put down to Nikki Haley. I was watching the video when some reporter or something told her, and she was like, well, we'll see. It was like a deer in the headlights. And then the DeSantis thing was like kaboom. I mean, I got to say, if you're Trump, it was like, it was an escalating political weekend of good news.
Yeah, it was just one piece of good news after another. And Sean, you know this. You've worked on a ton of campaigns over the years. You know how important momentum is in a campaign, whether it's a general election, whether it's a primary, or whether it's a caucus. And right now, President Trump has all the momentum. And forget the polls. You've seen all these polls recently that have come out and, Donald Trump's ahead and whatnot. But what I thought was the exit polls from the Iowa caucuses were very, very insightful. Because you look at it, if you're somebody like Nikki Haley, Donald Trump beat her with moderates in the Iowa caucuses. He actually beat her with suburban voters. He did better with women than he did with men. He beat her by over 30 points among women in the Iowa caucuses. So that's telling you right there. And he actually also won with independents. He won with independents by about 8 points in the Iowa caucuses. So all these groups that she claimed that she's going to run better with, Donald Trump was actually the one who was running better than Nikki Haley. So, she said she wanted a one-on-one race. She's got it.
It's interesting that you bring up those stats because I hadn't really delved into it to the extent that clearly you have. And I just knew that he won big, but it's interesting because they're banking on that going to New Hampshire, right? The whole thing that I find fascinating is the campaign from the Haley perspective is predicated on this idea that she can attract Democrats and independents into a primary. And I get it. There's really not a Democratic race to speak of for president tomorrow. But if she does well, it's not because she did well with Republican voters. Yep. It's because in New Hampshire, independents can vote in the primary and Democrats can register same day.
Yeah. And look, trying to rely on Democrats and Biden voters to win a Republican primary is not a real good strategy right now. And look, it's what I always say to people. Donald Trump has a message. He has a very powerful message that he's going to the primary voters with, that he's going to the general election voters with. What's her message? And I think what's happened is we've been seeing her numbers have actually been going down and Donald Trump's have been going up since the last debate that her and Ron DeSantis had, because I think a lot of people saw her and didn't like what they were seeing. And that's what I always tell folks. I said, I don't care who it is, whether it's Scott Walker, whether it's Jeb Bush, or whether it's Ron DeSantis. When that red light of the presidential campaign gets shown on you, and are you going to go up or are you going to go down? And I think she's going down. And the other thing is she's been throwing around saying that she's running better in the polls. She throws out the one outlier poll that had her up by 17 over Joe Biden, which was done months and months ago. But if you look at the average of the polls right now, Donald Trump does several points better than her versus Joe Biden. She's only getting about 42% of the vote versus Joe Biden, whereas Donald Trump gets about 47% of the vote versus Joe Biden.
But I want to go back to the idea of what you said about Iowa, because the narrative is this New Hampshire primary is where she could really excel because she can bring in independents and Democrats. But what you were saying is that in Iowa, when you looked at the actual results, he was doing well with independents and moderates. So he may actually completely crush her if that's true in New Hampshire. I get they're not necessarily the same voters because Iowa tends to be a little bit more conservative and evangelical, probably even within there. But this idea that the media is trying to perpetuate that all of these independents can come in and really help her might not be actually true.
Yeah. And when you look at the two most recent surveys that were done in New Hampshire, Matt Towery's Insider Advantage survey, they've got Donald Trump up getting 62% of the vote. The Boston Globe survey, which also looks like a pretty darn good survey, he's getting 57% of the vote. So he's not going down, he's going up. And that's one of the things that we've seen throughout this primary process. The more voters seem to see with Donald Trump and the more they hear him on the issues, the more it reminds them, hey, this guy did a really good job as president. And one of the best strategic things that this campaign did was they actually went over the heads of Ron DeSantis. They went over the heads of Nikki Haley, and they made this a race between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And that especially helps him among Republican primary voters. And Sean, the other point I want to make to you is this, yep, about 8 out of 10 voters in the Iowa caucuses are self-described conservatives, but about 2/3 of the folks that are telling you they're going to show up in the New Hampshire primary are self-described conservatives. While they may not necessarily be quite as conservative as they are in Iowa, they are still pretty darn conservative. And a lot of the attack points that Nikki Haley has been using, quite honestly, have been the same attacks that Joe Biden and the left are using against Donald Trump. And I think many of them are backfiring. That's why Donald Trump's going up in the polls.
So let me just, I want to start down a path for a second, but just, you've been doing this a long time. When you look at the results late Tuesday night or Wednesday morning from the New Hampshire primary, what in your mind, take Donald Trump, take Nikki Haley out of the equation for a second. Generic candidate A, generic candidate B. What would constitute a blowout for candidate A?
Oh, look, I think Nikki Haley's put everything into New Hampshire.
No, but I get that. I don't just let's just keep it generic for a second.
Mm-hmm.
If you woke up and you looked at candidate A and candidate B the day after an election, candidate A beats candidate B by X number. What number in your mind gets blowout status versus just one?
I think, look, it's got to be Nikki Haley has to win. I'm sorry, because it's not a hypothetical.
Well, it is. I mean, it is, because what I'm trying to get at is that if somebody called me up and said, hey, my candidate won the race, and I say, how much did you win by? And they go, we won by 15 votes. And they'd be like, well, that was close. You call and say I win by 15 points. That's a blowout to me. And the reason I'm asking is the Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, it's all going to be about expectations and perceptions and whatever. And my point is this. Let me just add the reality back in, because you've touched on it. You got that brand new Boston Globe poll out. It shows Trump up 57-38. That's a 19-point lead, right? All of these polls have him between 50, 55, 56, now 57. Her in the high 30s. One actually touches 40. And DeSantis was always between 6 and 8 points. So his supporters apparently break Trump about 2/3. My point is this. If he blows Nikki Haley out in New Hampshire by 15 points or more, where she was perceived to have done the best she could possibly do because of this influx of independents, I don't see how you wake up Wednesday morning and make the case to go on if you lost by 15 points. So let's kind of put that ball in play. If she loses by more than 15 points, I just don't see how you can make the case to donors or volunteers that you can stay in the race.
I think she has to win it, let alone lose by 15, or she keeps it within single digits. Because the other interesting thing is, and this is one of the reasons why Ron DeSantis got out, not only did he underperform in Iowa, and by the way, he beat Nikki Haley in Iowa, he was losing by over 30 points in his home state of Florida. Now we've seen another poll that's come out by a respected pollster, Tony Fabrizio, where Donald Trump is beating her by 39 points in South Carolina.
I saw that.
And so, and look, Tony doesn't cook numbers. The numbers are what the numbers are.
Right.
That's why I think she's staying in. She's trying to get a delegate or two in New Hampshire. She's going to say I was the last one standing. But I don't think if she loses New Hampshire, I'm just saying reality. This isn't hypothetical. This is Donald Trump versus Nikki Haley. She's put all her ducks into New Hampshire, like Ron DeSantis put
Right.
all his ducks into Iowa. If she doesn't win New Hampshire, there's just not a path there right now.